I'm Kathy Draycott. I'm a lecturer in classical archaeology in the Department of Archaeology at Durham University. I teach Greek and Anatolian art and archaeology, and I have a specialist research area in art and identity in the archaic and classical period Anatolia. So I'm engaged in teaching in a variety of the different modules on offer at Durham. One of them is a first year module in cities and antiquity, in which I teach the Athens component, and we look at Athens and its development from the archaic period or even earlier, the Bronze Age period, through to the Roman period, and how the character of the city changed. I do occasional lectures for some other first year options and put together a field trip to Roman Corbridge, which is very exciting. And this year I'm also running a specialist third year module in Greeks and Others, which is on art and identity in ancient Greece and beyond. So we'll look at the production of art in different areas of Greece and how it's regionally different, and also the production of art in the neighbours of the Greeks' territory, and how that is similar and different to what goes on in the Greek world. My main area of research at the moment is on art and identity in archaic and classical period, or the early classical period Anatolia. And I should clarify that that means the early Achaemenid period. So the Achaemenid Persians conquered Anatolia, and after they conquer Anatolia there is a flourishing of tombs, and within those, some very beautiful, although sadly not very well preserved in many cases, artwork. And what I'm doing is looking at those and trying to establish what kinds of images were favoured, what kinds of images were chosen in different areas, and to unpack the kinds of social identities that people adopted within that particular political and economic context. At the moment I'm writing an article on the use of myth, for instance, in two tombs, one in the northwest of Anatolia and one in the southwest. And one of the slants of my research interests is in how you go about actually interpreting images, because they're not very straightforward. You cannot simply look at an image and start to unpack that this person is the deceased person chose an image because it represents themselves in a certain light. They're not portraits. So the myths can be particularly tricky. How does this function to actually memorialize the person? So I'm looking at one particular case study in the northwest, as I said, in which the Trojan princess Polyxena is shown being murdered on a sarcophagus, and trying to unpack how that might have resonated for the people at the time, and how we can actually navigate trying to work that out with very little literature and contextual information from that area and that time period. And this is one of the challenges of working in Anatolia, and one of the exciting things about working with it, because it's in texts quite poorly represented and only represented by Greeks from the outside, and yet it's got all this art, which is very useful for trying to reconstruct the history of the place, but it presents challenges for interpretation. I do have some students who are working on related areas to this. So for instance, one of my dissertation students at the moment is working on some 4th century BC, slightly later than the period I usually work on, some 4th century BC tomb art from Lycia in southwest Anatolia, and she's looking at trying to gather together the range of images that were used on some tombs down there, and trying to see what kinds of themes were favoured, and whether she can look at any geographical patterns that come out of this. Another student of mine is engaged in, I feel like we're working together on trying to look at the material and visual culture of Laconia and Sparta in the Peloponnese in Greece, because there's been quite a lot of scattered work that's done on the archaeology, but not really a kind of synthesis of this. And this all goes together with the idea of looking at how styles and art are not necessarily a one-to-one match with ethnic groups. So you cannot just have Greek art that all looks the same. It's regionally different, and sometimes you might have Greek art that looks very much like the sort of art that Anatolians use. I'll pick a case study to illustrate my work from southwest Turkey, which is a painted tomb in the north of what's called ancient Lycia. Now within this tomb there are about 20 different paintings, some of which include Greek myth. For some of those myths, one might, based on later literature, assume that, for instance, the image of the Trojan prince Troilus about to be ambushed by Achilles may resonate within a tomb context because of the unfortunate demise of this young prince who didn't stand a chance against the hero Achilles. In a sense, that's a blameless death, and that may reflect on the blamelessness of the death of the deceased. Another of the paintings, however, creates problems because it shows Perseus decapitating Medusa and absconding with her head. And a lot of people have tried to put political interpretations on this based on Perseus either being the father of the Persians or coming from the east himself, or having a relationship with the Greeks, or because Bellerophon later rode, this Greek hero Bellerophon later rode Pegasus, who actually sprang from Medusa's neck and is shown in this image springing from her neck. That may have a relationship to the locality and its mythology, but it's very, very difficult to pin down what these images meant. A case study which demonstrates the difficulties of trying to reduce the meaning of images shown on tombs to just one kind of social understanding, a normative understanding, would be something that I've worked on for an edited book, a co-edited book that will be coming out. And this is the images of banquets that are shown on tombs. They're very, very widespread, and they become even more so in the Hellenistic and Roman period. A lot of the Greek literature and Roman literature would indicate that ideas of the afterlife do not include dining or any kind of pleasurable activity, except for those who are heroes, considered to be heroes such as Heracles or other Greek heroes. They have a special afterlife. The normal one is very, very bleak. The one in Homer, for instance, is very, very grey. So the idea, and the prevalent idea about a lot of these images, is that they don't show anything to do with the afterlife, but they show just a kind of generic image of social success. Now that's not necessarily untrue, but it doesn't leave a lot of scope for the imaginative interaction between people and the images. So a lot of what's been put forward in this book revolves around trying to allow more scope for imaginative interactions with these images, and especially the banquet image is so ambiguous. I don't think people necessarily always had a clear understanding of why they were using those images, and there's a lot of scope for people having visited these tombs and seen these images and constructing their own rather varied ideas of what these things mean and how they may, in fact, have fed into ideas about the afterlife that we don't find prevail within the texts. An analogy would be our use of flowers on graves. We might question, do we have a socially normative understanding of why we do that? I think that we do it because it's traditional, and we don't clearly understand what they symbolize. And if you asked many different people, they would come up with many different answers for what these flowers meant to them. So can't reduce to just one meaning.